Okay, so we'll begin with the first Mishna in Pirkei Avot, which begins, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, u'misara liYoshua, v'Yoshua l'zakenim, u'zakenim l'neviim, u'neviim misaruha l'anshei knesset hagadola. So the Mishnah begins with this portrayal of this transmission of the Masorah of the Torah. It seems to be talking about Torah in general, not Pirkei Avot, not Moshe kibel Pirkei Avot misinai, but Moshe kibel Torah misinai. And it is a little bit interesting that the Mishnah switches the verbs, where Moshe kibel received the Torah from Sinai, and then for the remainders, it's Misara liYoshua, Yoshua l'zakenim, etc., until it repeats the verb Misarua. So we have this Kabbalah, this acceptance of the Torah by Moshe, whereas each stage afterwards, it wasn't kibel, but it was Masara, handed over, passed over, transmitted. And Rabbi Meir Tversky had a very interesting suggestion as to the meaning of this distinction, which is that Masara is when you have something and you hand that object over to the next person. And that happens after Moshe, but when Moshe, being the first person to receive the Torah from Hashem, the Torah itself didn't exist as it is until it sort of reached the hands of the first human. And then it became the Torah. It's sort of like, Rabbi Tversky said it was kind of like, when the snow falls down from the clouds and then it hits warmer air, it turns into water, and then if it hits colder air, it could turn into ice. So it wasn't that let's say the sleet didn't really come from the cloud, but once it came to the atmosphere, it became sleet. So in a similar way, the Torah didn't exist when it was in the heavens, but it only came into existence when it came into the hands of Moshe. And then Moshe was able to hand it over to the next generation and the next generation. And I think that this insight is particularly relevant to Pirkei Avot itself, which it's one of my favorite things to learn. There's a lot of wisdom and interesting things in Pirkei Avot. When you read Pirkei Avot the first time, which is often when we're young, it's also great. It's like, second graders, third graders really enjoy Pirkei Avot because the teachings are so simple. And the challenge in learning Pirkei Avot, or the opportunity of learning Pirkei Avot, is to take these brief teachings and just really explore them and to think about how to understand them in different ways, how the teaching is not as obvious as we might have thought, what might be the novelty of the Mishnah, what are the parameters of the teaching, is it always, sometimes, and what after you sort of develop the Mishnah and think about the parameters and what one might have thought without the Mishnah and what the Mishnah is coming to teach us and what the parameters are and the limitations, after you do all that, then you really have a guide to life. But it's only once you go through that process that you actually receive Pirkei Avot. You learn kibel Pirkei Avot by learning it and exploring it. But the thing itself isn't handed over uniquely, as opposed to other areas of the Torah where you have the halachot of Shabbos, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do, and we have very specific instructions explaining the laws of Shabbos. Here with Pirkei Avos, it's not like that, and it's obvious that it has to be that way because you can't transmit character traits in a Shulchan Aruch style, delineating all the scenarios and all the correct behaviors. But it's only by exploring them and internalizing them and thinking them through and figuring out the parameters of these teachings that we actually have the guide to life. So therefore, I think Pirkei Avos is uniquely kibel, not Masara. I can't give it to you, but we can learn it and think about it together and think about how it could enhance our lives, and then we will have a real guide. So the first Mishnah, so the Masorah is traced from Moshe to Yoshua, Yoshua to the Zakenim to the Neviim, which means the entire time period of Nevuah, all the Nevi'im who handed it to the Anshe Knesset Gedola. And this Anshe Knesset Gedola, Amru Shlosha Dvarim, they had like 3 teachings that they would often say. The first is Havu Matunim B'din, be patient or deliberate or slow in judgment. Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, have many students, hold up many students. And thirdly, Asula Siag the Torah, make a fence around the Torah. So all 3 of these teachings seem like they might be addressed specifically to leaders or to judges who are the ones who do judgments, who are the ones who have students, and who are the ones who make fences around the Torah. But also the Mishna, I think, is applicable to every person who makes certain judgments in life and should do so slowly and deliberately. Secondly, everyone should offer teachings to many students. Mishna says later on in Pirkei Avot that that a person can learn from anybody, and therefore any person could therefore teach others. And asu siag Torah, making a fence around the Torah, is also something that is not only like legislating gzeros de rabbanan, but also in our own lives, thinking about what are the things that might put us in a situation when we might do the wrong thing, and then making fences and avoiding those situations are things that we can also do ourselves in our everyday lives. If whenever I go to the store, I always buy the wrong thing, so just like avoid going there, that's making a siyag in our own lives without legislating a decree by the rabbis that no one's allowed to walk by that store. Let's just talk one more minute about the first teaching, Havu Matunim B'din, be deliberate and slow in judgment. So when it comes to making judgment, we usually say don't be judged. Don't judge other people unless you're a judge, you have to. But generally, we don't encourage judgments. So here the Mishnah says Havu Matunim B'din, which implies that we should make judgments and we should do so with patience. And I think that the Mishnah really means that we're always making judgments in our lives. Every time that you decide where you want to live, where you want to go to shul, who you want to pursue friendships with, everything we do in our lives requires judgments. And we can say we're not judgmental, which in my opinion means that we don't judge for the sake of judging. I think this person is good or bad. This city is good or bad. But the judgments that we should be making are, this is a good place for me to live. This is a friendship that's good for my personal growth. This is a book that's good for me. This is a shiur that's good for my learning. Not to say this is a good shiur or a bad shiur. That's judgment. This is a shiur that's good for me, that helps me. That is an important judgment to make. And if it's not good for you, even if the shiur itself is good, then you should make a judgment that this is not a good use of my own time. So here what the Mishnah is saying is that we really do make a lot of judgments appropriately, but when we do so, we should do so very slowly and very deliberately. Don't rush to judgment, because sometimes our first impression, our gut impression, is actually not correct. Be slow and deliberate. Hear it out. Try it more times. Sometimes the first impression, we like to trust our gut, but sometimes the first impression is really not the most precise one. And therefore, whenever we're making judgments about things and people and decisions, do so slowly and patiently, and don't assume that we know right away. The second teaching, Ha'amidu Talmid Harbeh, I think, is to say, don't be so selective on who's worthy of learning, but try to include everyone in your learning. And many Mefarshim highlight the word ha'amidu as raise up, give them their own standing. and don't just you don't support them. They should be able to support themselves after you do a good job. And lastly, Asusia Torah, I think, has two purposes. One is that it protects us from violating the Torah when we make these fences. Secondly, the fence is a way of demonstrating the fact that we really value the Torah. So even aside from the fact that the fence would protect us, it also just shows the value that we protect and we make safeguards around things that are very valuable to us. So making these boundaries is actually a way of showing how much we love and value the Torah, and our worst fear is to, God forbid, violate it.